task, the last task for this year, is a comparative response. You've already done one this year, but it is perhaps the hardest task. But if you can go into your WACE exam with a comparative response, it means you can answer more questions. So out of the WACE exam, there'll be 6 questions in it, and probably half of them usually will be 2 text questions. So if you go in and you can't do a comparative response, you can't do a 2 text question, then you're leaving yourself to only having 3 questions left to answer. So it is really good if you can go in with a strong comparative response. So a comparative essay is something that asks you to compare at least 2 or possibly more items, and the items will differ depending on the assignment. So you might be asked to compare positions on an issue. So, for example, you might be asked to compare the responses to the other, which is like the refugees in Exit West, and the poor in Elysium. You might be asked to compare the refugees in Exit West, to the poor in Snowpiercer, the people that are at the end of the train, or in Stranger Things, that text that you're doing, you're looking at the poor children that disappear and nobody wants to go find them and look into it. So you're usually asked to find a position on an issue. You might be asked to compare 2 theories, but this is more a literature style thing, so it won't actually come up very much in English. You might be asked to compare the text based on text conventions. So if they say things like multimodal features of a film or the narrative features of a novel. So all of you are doing visual text. So today we're going to go through some visual techniques. So if I refer to a technique as a film technique, it is also a visual text technique. So that means it's a storybook technique, it's a print ad technique, it's a documentary technique. All right, so they all use the same visual techniques. It also might, although the question says compare, the assumption is that you'll compare and contrast. So the assumption is that you'll look at both texts and look at how they're similar and how they're the same. So in section 1, like I said the week before last, they sometimes have a comparison in section 1. So in the first exam, 2016, they didn't. Then 2017, they did. 2018, they didn't. Who knows whether they will in 2019. If they follow a pattern, they might. So the comparison in that section asks you to compare 2 texts. The good thing about this is that if you are comparing text 1 and text 2 in the first section, if you read the question for text 3, it usually gives you a hint about what is important in text 2. So also, if you've already written about text 2, you've half your responses written for your comparative, because they'll say, look at that idea and compare it now to the idea in another text. So, for example, in the 2017 WACE, they had the snake text and the pets text. So in that one, it asked them to compare the relationships to animals. So there was a relationship to snakes in text 2 and pets in text 3. So what they wanted them to look at was the relationships and then how they were represented differently. So in text 2, it was a narrative and it used metaphors and similes, and the relationship was one of respect and fear. In text 3, the author was frustrated with people's relationships with their pets to the point that they'll bring him on aeroplanes and, pooing on planes and slobbering over our veggies. And so she showed that through sarcasm and her annoyance. So the key part of the question was saying differently. So it means you have to understand the features of the text type. So you need to understand that metaphors, scientific imagery, and dialogue were the features of the narrative, while sarcasm, humour, and hyperbole were features of the opinion piece. So these are some questions from the last 2 years' WACE exams. Compare how attitudes towards a particular group or issue have been represented in 2 texts studied. So this question here is saying, they want you to look at the attitudes towards a particular group or issue. Now, these are so broad. You could get a question like this and you would be able to compare Exit West and the text you're studying, because you'll say the attitudes towards a particular group, which Exit West is the attitudes towards the poor, and then your other text might be towards the refugees, and then your other text may have attitudes towards the poor. And then it will say represented in two texts. So represented means the conventions. They want you to look at the way those texts have explored those ideas, how they've made us feel sorry for the refugees or the poor that are in those texts. The next question is from 2017 WACE exam. Explore how two texts of different genres respond to concerns of the same time period. So again, Exit West is a very modern text, and a lot of the times when you're doing films, they tend to be modern. So you can say that they're looking at concerns of the same time period. The concerns of those time periods was that we are treating refugees or poor people or people that have less as less than human, as we're treating them with less respect than we do people that have more. So then it says two different genres. So clearly Exit West is a narrative and a novel, and most of you are doing a visual text, so you just have to make sure you cover the differences in the genres. You have to talk about the conventions. And then the last one from another exam, compare how two texts of different modes use textual features to explore a similar idea or theme. So these questions are all pretty much asking the same thing. So two different modes. So mode is how the text is conveyed. So a film is a visual and an audio mode, and a narrative is a language mode text. So if you're doing a picture book, it's obviously a visual and language as well, but a film is visual, language, and audio. So it combines three different modes to get its ideas across. But then you would find two texts with similar ideas or themes. We've all picked texts that have similar ideas or themes. We've all found texts that connect to an idea. So the idea may be really specific, like your text may be about refugees. So we're doing Elysium, which is not about refugees, but it's about the poor who are left stranded on a rundown, ruined earth, and they want to get to Elysium, which is like a country of plenty, but it's a satellite above the earth, and they get on pirate ships and they get to Elysium, but they're rejected by the rich and the wealthy there, and the rich and wealthy tend to be white, and they tend to, all speak English. So even though they're not both refugees, in fact, they are both unwanted. They're both the other. They're the rejected from society. So the thing you're comparing can be broad. They both have less than the wealthy. So the first thing you should do when you're comparing is make a list of similarities and differences. And I've got some charts in these activity books for you. So if we were doing that text in section 1, I made this list of the differences between the two animals that were being represented. So the snake was dangerous, deadly, scientific, feared, respected, a source of life and death, represented Mother Earth, whereas the pets were slobbering, smelly, unhygienic, pooing, inconveniencing, a sign of human silliness and inability to cope with the reality of life. And then I made a list of all the different conventions. So I looked at, because it said the differences, I looked at how the snake text has metaphors, similes, deadly and scientific diction, and it alludes to the Dreamtime mother. And then the pet text had corrupt diction, it had lexical choice of placing dogs in incongruous settings like food places or concert halls. It had a negative tone, it had hyperbole, rhetorical questions, and humour. So there's two different ways you can do a comparative essay and a comparative response. You can do alternating. So you can say a point about text 1 and a point about text 2, point about text 1, point about text 2. Or you can do subject by subject. So you talk all about the snake text, say, and then you have a linking sentence to the next text, and you talk all about the pet text. And in your concluding statement, you look at how they compare and contrast to each other. but in an extended essay, you're obviously going to have a lot more to talk about. You're going to have more than 2 paragraphs. So first of all, you introduce your 2 texts in your introduction, give a roadmap what you're going to talk about, and you talk about how the text shares similarities and what you're comparing, what idea, and so on and so forth. If you do the text subject by subject one, in this one you would have paragraph 1, and then you would talk, say, all about the exit west, the refugees, the oppressed minority, characterization, for example, might be your technique, and then you would talk about text 2, the characterization. Then the next one you would have text 2, oppressed minority represented through. Oh, I copied that. No, so then you would go on to say sorry, get rid of that. But then you go on to talk about symbolism in text 1 and 2, and then oh no, I did. What did I do? Subject by subject. I don't know what I'm doing. The next one, what I find confusing about that technique, I don't like it myself, but I find that you feel like you're chopping and changing. So I like the technique where you talk about text 1, then you talk about text 2, but then you constantly, so say you talk about the idea and how it's been presented in Exit West, but then you would talk about the same idea and say how it's been presented in the next text. But you would link back to Exit West continuously. You would say, okay, well, in Exit West, they presented the refugees like in this way, but in this text, they represent the poor in this way. All right, so you're constantly tying back to them all the time. And then you do the next idea, and the next idea, and so on and so forth. So you need to find what you're connecting them to. Now, in this essay, you can almost guess what the questions are going to be by what's in the course. So this is copied from the course concepts. So we are investigating and evaluating the relationships between text and context. So that means you have to understand that Exit West comes from a modern context where people are starting to complain and fight against the mistreatment of refugees. People are concerned about their fellow man in today's society. Similarly, modern texts that are produced, which most films we're studying, they are doing the same thing. They don't believe that just because you're born wealthier or born white or born in a country of wealth that you matter more than someone else. So people that are making those films are saying it's not, we don't value people based on race or wealth. We value people because they're people. So that's how the context is the same. All right. Unless you're studying a really old text, which I don't think anyone is. Do you know what year the documentary was produced? Oh, okay. What was it called again? Okay. Have you heard of that one? No. I'm going to watch it tonight. So basically it's obviously a modern film. And can you tell me briefly what the film's about?
A refugee that tries to come to Australia, but then ends in Afghanistan.
Okay. All right.
He won the Australian Literary Award.
And he talks about his life through WhatsApp.
Oh, that's right. I did hear about that one. So he tells his whole story through WhatsApp, and then someone published it from Nauru. Yeah. So great, perfect. So it's the exact same context, so it's really easy to combine. So basically you're looking at, on the one side, Exit West is reflecting our modern context where we're saying, this is ridiculous, we need to do something to help these refugees. And then your text is saying, this is how these refugees are suffering from that personally. This is how they're feeling when they're, trapped and locked away and rejected by society. So the syllabus says as well that we're going to compare the context in which they were created and received. So obviously that's our modern context, and how they're received. Both texts are award-winning. They've won lots of awards because society is believing that these are important values. Society believes that we are all equal regardless of race, culture, religion, and where you're born. So that's why these texts were received so well. You're also going to look at the values and assumptions in each text. So you're going to look at, what does the authors of those texts value, and what do we value, and how do we agree with those values? And last of all, you're going to look at what has been left out, what omissions there are, what inclusions, what is emphasised and what's marginalised. So, for example, the nativists in Exit West, they are quite marginalised. They are only shown as a collective voice. They're not shown individually, so we don't get to know them. Like Nadia and Saeed, they are people with names and families, and they are loved. They have romantic lives. They have relationships. The nativists, we never get that. We only get them as a collective mob. They're an angry mob. They're a violent mob. And even when they are alone, like the man in Tokyo watching the women, they're doing something aggressive. So you could say that the voices of the nativists are not actually, given any expression. But he also chooses to only include those so-called nativists. So I said to my class, imagine if it was your home. So imagine like thinking about the first vignette when the woman is in Sydney and the guy climbs through her cupboard. And imagine if that's you and you're asleep at night, and instead of him leaving your room, you wake up in the morning and the guy's like, yeah, I'm just decided I'm going to share your room from now on. You don't mind, do you? And then you go out for breakfast and there's 3 other people sitting at the table, and you go to have breakfast and there's none left because they're like, yeah, we just decided we're going to have some of your Cocoa Pops because we're hungry. You don't mind, do you? And, you start to think about that and you think, well, I'm in the safety of my home. Yes, I do mind. Like, get out of my home. This is my place. And then I wanted to eat that food, and and you start to think, well, Hamid's perspective is, yeah, it's lovely, it's sweet, it's optimistic, like let's just share the world. But what happens if everyone's sharing the world and we become overpopulated, or you know what I mean? Like, what happens in that case? And are people willing to give up what they have? So in our film Elysium, the secretary just says to the president, what happens when they're knocking on your door and they want to take your kids' homes? How do you feel about it then? And that's something that's never really spoken about in Exit West. He doesn't give that other view, the fact that, there is a reasonable other side to that argument. You can't just have open borders because it's not realistic. How would you control it? How would you control who came in? So we have to look at some of those things as well in text, like why is the author leaving that out? Because he wants to promote his point of view, which is we all share it. So as well, in your course outline, it will give you a couple of teaching points. If you go back to your original course outline, and so the teaching points were that we're looking at both genre types, the language structure and style. So remember, when it uses words in questions like what's a language pattern, that means anything. So a language pattern can be used in film. It means a language pattern is film codes, film camera angles, music. Structure is everything within the text, however it's structured, and style is the way they produce it. So in Snowpiercer, it's very like comic book, very out there, very alternate, like it's very gory to the point of, it's almost like a Tarantino film. Elysium, it's very bland, very low-key colours, very washed out. Earth is all very dry and brown and dusty. So that's the style. It's got this futuristic dystopian style to it, and same as Snowpiercer. With your doco, it's probably got quite a realism style. It's probably quite gritty and real, and I imagined it's filmed with lots of handheld cameras and things like that, and phone cameras. So there won't be a real sophisticated glossy style to it. And then thinking about the style of Stranger Things, like that's quite unique in it as well. Like Stranger Things is very retro, very 80s like, it's very flashback to the past. So even in the way it's filmed, like the colour of the actual film, it's very 80s colours, very low saturation. All right, so you have to know your two text types. So Exit West is a novel, it's a narrative, its mode is written, its genre is narrative, its subgenre is magical realism. It uses language devices, symbolism, characterization, plot, point of view to explore themes and issues. The second text is a visual text. It uses visual text conventions. Its mode, if film-based, is visual, audio, and written. Its genre is film or TV. Its subgenre can be dystopian, action, romantic, or documentary. It could be a picture book, so its mode could be visual and written. So that genre is picture book, subgenre is realism or fantasy, whatever it is. Yep.
2 points. Could you put this on one night?
Yep.
And second one, could we use ethos and pathos?
So they are things that they appeal to. So they appeal to your ethos and pathos, yes, but they're not a convention. So they use conventions to make you feel emotive. Yeah.
Could I put that as like a point and then bring it down conventions?
Yes, yeah. Especially in a documentary in particular, because it is trying to appeal to those. So next, know your ideas. You need to know the context of Exit West. You need to know the context of your film, because it said that these questions are going to be about that. It's saying it in the course outline. You need to know which groups are marginalised, which are the refugees, the rejected, the powerless, the unwanted, which groups' voices are left out, and who's left out, who's marginalised. Then compare the ideas. So in this bit here, and I've included that table somewhere. So think about Exit West is about marginalised and unwanted refugees. So in the compared text, who is silenced and left out? So in your text, it's refugees as well. In your text, it's Stranger Things is the poor children. Yeah? The children of the poor. Who's from doing Stranger Things? Oh, you're Stranger Things. And in Snowpiercer, who are the unwanted? It's obviously the poor at the back of the train. Now, in that film, basically how it works is the poor at the end of the world, they all get on this train and they're all traveling around the world and they can't stop moving because they'll freeze to death. And most people paid for a ticket on, but then they let a few people on for free. And those people are the poor at the back of the train. And they don't get, they don't get decent food. They don't get any rights or whatever at all. So the whole point is about who is unwanted, who is silenced and left out. Then you've got the changing world and the diversity of people. So what is it saying about the world? It's saying that we're all equal now. So all of those texts are trying to produce that idea that we're all equal, that race shouldn't matter, that wealth shouldn't matter. Where you're born shouldn't matter. Most of the time, all of the texts that you're comparing will have an antagonist. So in Exit West, the antagonist is the selfish nativists and the first world countries that don't want them there and that want them to leave. So in the other texts, who are the antagonists? Again, it's the rich, it's the wealthy, government, yep. Sometimes the government, there's also like the armed forces in some way appear in these texts, like the people who enforce the government's rule. And then you can also look at the silenced voices of women as well in some texts. So there's not much of women's voices in Exit West, like even Nadia doesn't get explored in depth. It actually stays away from her a lot, like we don't get a lot of her emotions. Think about how all of these texts as well, whenever you have these futuristic texts or dystopian texts as well, that they always seem to revert to the patriarchal society as well, where women have no control. So then compare how they do it. So these are the techniques of Exit West. Point of view is third person omniscient and godlike. It uses psychic distance that zooms into two lovers, Nadia and Saeed, and then zooms out to many refugees and migrants around the world. So how does the compared text convey it? Well, it depends on your text style. So in a film, like say in our film, we follow one main character, which is our character. I know he's played by Matt Damon. I can't remember his name, but in your documentary, you follow one main character. Yeah. So again, you have a protagonist who is at the bottom, who is the, they're the other, they're the marginalized. So it creates a hero in that we want him to succeed. So you think about it, in the old days, old films, it was all about, the heroes were always sort of like the good guy, the white savior, and, the Superman sort of hero. Whereas these days we've got our heroes, we want them to be people that have, suffered a bit in life and had things a bit harder, and we want them to rise up against the corrupt government and things. So, so usually it's told through the perspective of one character. So Stranger Things told through the perspective of the mother who's lost her child. The documentary is told from the perspective of the refugee guy that told his story. And Snowpiercer is told from the main perspective, again, of one marginalised hero that's going to save them all. So quite telling as well that the two feature films we're doing both have men who are going to save them all. And only one of the texts is actually about a female character who's going to save them. So we still have this need for this male saviour. All right, so we usually have a marginalised hero. We usually have the antagonist that, we only see them acting badly. In all of the things, like we only see the negatives of the antagonist so that we can reject their point of view. And whether it's a documentary or a feature film, you follow these characters around through their perspective and see what, you want them to win, basically. Then, no matter whether it's a documentary or a feature film, you still would have a character. So the character in your documentary would be, his positives would be focused on. We would get to know them as a person. We would get to know them whether they have family, because all of us have family and we all relate to that. We get to know their sort of dreams and goals. Like our character in Elysium, we see as a child, and we see him with his childhood friend who he, grows up and he wants to have a better life. So we often find out about our main characters, about how they have these dreams and goals. So you think about the documentary, do they tell us about their dreams and goals and what their plans were at the beginning? Is that what we find out about? Yeah. So then we associate with that protagonist because we can hear their story. So no matter what type of text, the characters are usually always what's focused on, because that's what gets us close to them. And then they try and appeal to us. Like you said, they appeal to our pathos and our ethos. They tell us how these characters are as a father, as a mother, as a brother or a sister. They make connections to our life, things that we can understand. And then they give them goals and dreams that are similar to our goals and dreams. And then we connect with those characters and we follow them on a journey. So you can connect your text through that. And then think about symbolic elements. So in our text, we actually found we have a lot of water, we have a lot of nature in Elysium. We have a lot of light and dark, like the bad guys in Elysium all wear white, and they're all pretty much white people, and they all pretty much speak English, and they all wear business suits, and they're all wealthy, and Elysium itself is all white, and Elysium itself as a space station is actually shaped like the Mercedes-Benz symbol, which is a symbol of wealth. So we could compare that to so many things in Exit West. So think about the symbols that are in your text that are similar. So in your documentary, for example, the mobile phones are what give your refugee power. So just like the mobile phones in Exit West connect to Nadia and Saeed at times when they can't be connected, and it connects Nadia and Saeed to their family, think about how that mobile phone gave that guy a voice. So before his phone, he had no voice. He had no way of reaching out to the world and letting them know what was happening on Nauru. And he had no way of letting us know about his goals and dreams and who he was as a person. He was just another faceless immigrant, and a legal immigrant that our government had told us was dangerous and scary and we can't have on our country. So through the use of the mobile phone as a symbol, it's given him power. It's given him the ability to become our protagonist. So you can really find a good connection to that symbol of mobile phones. What are some other things that you can connect? So in Exit West, you have doorways, but in your documentary, how does he get there? How does he get to Nauru? By boat. So instead of a doorway, which is about being reborn, he goes on a boat, which is again is another form of rebirth. You can also think about how it changes him. So the symbol of being reborn through those doorways is the rebirth is you have to become a different person after you go through such a bad suffering. And that's the same as that guy in the documentary. He probably mentions quite a few times about what he used to be like, what he used to think like, and probably thinks about, says, now I'm like this. He probably talks a lot about the changes in himself because it's all about this being reborn through the tragedy that you go through. So think about connecting Exit West through that motive as well, the idea of rebirth. If you're thinking about Stranger Things, I mean, technically, they literally go into another world and have a womb-like sort of doorway that the mother pulls the child through to save him. He actually gets reborn and pulled back into the light world. And then think about darkness and light as well. So think about the filming of Nauru. Think about, is there lots of things that are kept in darkness when they do the filming? Is there lots of things that are kept out? So same as in Snowpiercer, there's in the poor section, there's little lighting. It's very dark. It's very dirty. And whereas in the rich section, it's light, it's bright, it's wealthy, it's clean. So compare the symbols. So if you compared those three aspects, you can see that you've got more than enough to write about in a comparative essay. All right. So with the visual text, know your conventions of the text types. Know the conventions of film. So I'm going to go through those briefly now and then help you through a few activities. All right. So first of all, we talk about film codes as in SWOT codes. So SWOT stands for symbolic, written, audio, technical. Technical codes include things like framing. So framing is everything you see in the scene. So things in a scene, we normally expect them to be balanced. So this is your very stereotypical framing. This is how a photographer should take a photo if you want everything to look normal to our eyes. So the minute anything in a frame that's off center and off balance, it tells our minds that something's wrong with the scene. So what you'll notice in a lot of these films that are trying to set up the idea of the antagonist and the protagonist is the antagonist will often be filmed incorrectly. They'll be filmed from a funny angle. They'll be filmed from some kind of low but canted angle. And things will look off. They'll be larger in the frame. So basically, we have the normal way of seeing things is you have a rule of thirds, and anything that exists in the main center of the thirds is the salient image, it's the main image. But then things within the scene connect to each other. So often people are framed by doorways, by windows, by hallways, and even by legs in the case of this film here. The framing itself sends a message. Like the framing of Katniss in that movie from the Hunger Games. This is actually the last film where she refuses to be bound by their ideas of her anymore. So she's bursting out of the frame. So she's choosing to reject what they're trying to put her in. This one here is from Children of Men, and you can see outside the window pigs are flying. So it's suggesting that it's ludicrous, like whatever is going on. Oh, is it?
Yeah, cover one of their albums.
Oh, okay. In Beautiful Mind here, you see he's trapped behind a window with lots of different frames, and that represents the fact that he's trapped by his genius, like he's trapped behind it because he can't escape it. So think back to your documentaries or your films and think about how people are framed. If you think back, and if I recall in Stranger Things, the mother's often filmed behind behind house windows when she's pacing. She's often filmed in the kitchen, in the doorways. She's constantly trapped by the poverty of her life and the fact that no one will listen to her about her child missing because she's just poor and unimportant. All right, so think about your docos. He's often probably filmed in a closed space. He's trapped by his imprisonment on Nauru. So framing is very important in scenes because they tell us a lot about the character. So you've also got camera shots. So you have close-ups, full shots, medium shots. So whatever you see in the frame is tells you, what type of shot it is. So you've got extremely close, not as, loosely close or medium close, medium shot, medium full, and then full or long. So you can see there, extreme long shot, medium close, close up, extreme close up. What you'll find in movies that are trying to get a character close to you or documentaries, you'll see more close-ups. You'll see extreme close-ups. They'll focus on the eyes and the lips because the closer we get to the person's face, the closer we get to their character. Usually if they use a medium shot, it's because the setting that they want to show is as important as showing what they're thinking. So we have to see how the setting around them influences who they become. Forrest Gump, we have to see that he's waiting on a bus stop because this whole story is about his life and him retelling it and the journey he went on. So the bus stop's important because the bus stop symbolizes the journey. In this one, he's so unhappy because he's in a dead-end job working in a restaurant as 40-year-old. So we have to see where he is. So as we get closer, we feel more. So love scenes, love movies are often filmed from a close-up. So documentaries, if you want to see what the person's feeling, there'll be a lot of close-ups of their face and of their eyes and of their lips. Establishing shots, and the further away, we get less close to it, but it tells us what's going on in the film and how the world around them relates to the character. It tells us about the world of the setting of the film as well. Two shots is where you have two characters in a frame. You normally have one larger than the other. Then you've got camera angle. So what you'll find in a lot of documentaries and films is that the villain or the hero are filmed from low because they have power. A high angle takes the power away from them, and eye level means that we can relate to them. So a lot of docos in particular do eye level because we want to seem that we're equal to the character being interviewed. So in this movie here, you'll probably think, well, why are all these heroes filmed from a high angle? Why are we looking down at people that are typically heroes? Well, in this film, it's when they're about to be defeated by the only guy that could defeat them, which was Thanos. And so all of a sudden, their hero stature is taken away by using that high angle. You can see here these low angles are making them look taller and more powerful. So very rarely used on women, but in this film here, she's actually a femme fatale and she seduces men. So she's actually filmed in a way that men were typically filmed in the 40s, from that low angle giving her power. You can see here all of these low angles. These are villains, and they're also slightly canted as well, so which makes us seem off. High angle makes them look smaller, weaker, makes it seem godlike. So you could even compare, like if you've got a film or a doco where there's lots of godlike views, you could compare that to the godlike view that's shared in Exit West on the characters. So see how you can compare through the genre techniques as well as through the ideas. So God's eye view is often like a straight down or bird's eye view shot, which shows us how the person is within the scene, makes them seem helpless. They make us feel uncomfortable when we see it because it's not normal. We can't actually see things like that. And so it makes us feel uncomfortable. So then you have characters within frames that are larger than others, and they are the dominant character. They are more important. So think about how your characters are filmed within scenes and how they're shown compared to the bad guy. Dutch angles, now they can be called Dutch or canted, and this suggests something's wrong with the person. So whenever someone's filmed in this odd angle, we know that something's wrong with them and that they're sort of evil in some way, or they're going to do something. You also got symbols or images of duality which appear in films. So look at the films that you're doing and see if there's reflections in water, if there's reflections in mirrors, or whether there's shadows. And it tells us that that person has a hidden agenda. They have a hidden side to them, something that's going to come out and reveal more about them. So these are all from well-known films where the reflection is showing, like in this one, Black Swan down the bottom, she's actually going mad and she's got schizophrenia. And so it's showing that by the fractured mirror around her. This woman as well, it's showing that her levels of madness through the repeated images. Reflections in eyes are often used to show fear. And then we have editing techniques. Now, in documentaries, in the old days, basically we filmed on film and films were just cut. And then they learnt that if you overlapped the film and glued it together, you could create a dissolve. All right, so you went from having abrupt cutting to dissolve sort look, and then Hollywood were the ones that used that. So that became what we accepted as normal. So whenever a documentary or a film has lots of sharp cuts, we start to feel uncomfortable because we're used to watching films that dissolve into each other. So, which is not how our eyes work. We don't dissolve things with our eyes. We look from one thing to the other, or we pan across. But films that do lots of short, sharp, abrupt cuts, they put us on edge and they make us uncomfortable. So think about the film. Like, you'll notice that a lot of these action films, a lot of films like Snowpiercer, there is a lot of that very abrupt, rapid movement, which makes us feel uncomfortable and we don't know what's happening within the scene. And we start to feel anxious along with the characters because our eyes are trying to keep up. Horror films do it as well. They do it with the flashing of the light too. So it makes you can't focus properly. It makes your blood pressure rise and makes you actually get anxiety when you're watching the films. So these things actually have psychological effects on their viewers. And then you've got lighting. Lighting can be a technical code, but it also has moods and things as well. So which creates a sort of symbolic effect. So a lot of the times characters are shown hidden by the dark. So I'm not sure in your doco, but you may have he might be hiding himself in the footage at times because he's not supposed to be filming. He might be shown with bars across his face or in shadows and that. And all of that's deliberate. Like, they want him to come across as, looking entrapped, looking hidden, looking like he's, he's covered in darkness and not allowed to escape and be free. So then you have symbolic codes in films, so things like colors, characters. So you can connect this to the symbols in the novel as well. So colors in films often send a message. Yellow is often happy and fun. Pink is often symbolic of romance or passion. When you see lots of blue in films, it's symbolic of depression. So we all know what colors we associate with them, but we don't realize how often films use them and play on our emotions that way. A lot of superhero films, there's lots of blue in superhero films, lots of blue, lots of blackness, but lots of darkness in those films. Characters as well. Characters are the main part of the narrative. So look at their body language, look at their costumes, look at the props they carry. look at how they interact with each other, how they stand, what they their gaze is like. Do they stand very dominant and aggressive? Or do they, you look at Marilyn Monroe here, and her body language is saying she's relaxed, she's sensual, she's passionate, as opposed to these women here are very dominant and standing in an almost masculine way. So analyze how they stand, how they look at us, how they are portrayed in the scene. So what you'll find is your protagonists in a lot of films are portrayed as often strong. They have a direct gaze. They're very confident. Whereas women are often shown, they don't gaze directly at the film. They have more passive body language, and so on and so forth. And then you have symbolic objects in films as well. Settings can be symbolic, like things like bus stops, symbolic of journeys. The earth often features throughout films to give us a sense of our own mortality. The moon is a sign of, change, and there's a lot of biblical symbols throughout films. Stairways, there's always stairways, symbolic of going somewhere. Trains, symbolic of journeys again. Roads, clocks, symbolic of time. So think about the symbols that are in your films or docos and how they can relate to the symbols in Exit West. And then last of all, you have the audio. So nearly finished, guys. Diegetic sound, which is the realistic sound of the film. So the audio effects. Extra diegetic, which is like music that can be added. So music can be diegetic too. So if you see what's playing the music, it's diegetic. If the music's just in the background, it's non-diegetic. So diegetic is what you expect to be in the film. So when they film a film, they don't actually film sounds in a film. They film with closed mics that just record dialogue, and then they add sound effects in. They do that to make it sound natural, because if we filmed like using the camera, it's very tinny. So what you'll notice in your doco, because he's filming on a mobile phone, there'll be very muffled. There'll be lots of, it won't sound very professional. You'll hear a lot of background noises that can overtake the speaking sound. So documentaries in particular do like to do that because they want to seem real. They want to seem like they've not been staged and, done with all performance mics. So films, on the other hand, they definitely are playing with the sound effects. They add creepy sound effects. They add the music. They add, like in Elysium on the satellite, it's all violins playing and glasses chinking and birds chirping. But on Earth, there's horns honking, babies crying, dogs barking, and, the sounds of things breaking and everything. So we often don't notice those till we stop and listen, and we realize all of those things are adding to how we feel about the place. So some of the documentary, even though it may be filmed on the phone and things like that, there may be added sounds in. There may be added sounds of people crying and things like that. In the film Snowpiercer, there's added sounds of, there's often children crying and that when they're in the poor section. So think about the sounds in the film as well and how it creates that mood. And then, of course, the music creates moods too. And you can have also voiceovers and narrators and that convey important information. And then last of all is the written code. So this is not just important in docos, which it does give us the contextual information, but in films it often gives us like the dates. It tells us when things are happening. Even the type of text tells us, like in Stranger Things, it's very 80s type font. It's very retro, whereas in Elysium they use that computer type of writing, and it comes up like it's on a computer screen, and it even makes that beep 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 sound. Like, not that I've ever seen a computer do that in my whole life, but movies sort of came up with the idea that all computers type like that, and now forevermore symbolizes technological typing. But yeah, you'll see that the fonts and everything are carefully chosen to portray it. But you can't talk about it all as well. So you have to choose what you're going to talk about and what's going to be the best things to compare. So as I said before, probably the most powerful things to compare in your text are going to be those three main areas: point of view, who we follow, who we get close to, the characters, who we grow to love, who we bond with, and the symbolism. All right.